Quite some time ago, you guys know I started my Gods of the First Generation series, where I went over the 4 Pokemon throughout all of the generations that held up from the first generation to being like just gods of like just the whole game. And a lot of you guys like that. I had a very great enjoyment doing it, and you guys like gave me a lot of positive feedback. For the most part, the 4 Pokemon I picked, which were in order, in my favorite, like, it was like Starmie, Zapdos, Gengar, and Snorlax. Snorlax being probably one of the best, maybe. Now, you guys know there are a lot more Pokemon in that generation that were good. And as you guys can see by the title, today we will talk about the honorable mentions of the first generation. I'm not going to go into specific details on the after generations of these Pokemon. For example, I'm just going to stay into just Gen 1, just tell you guys how dominant they were just in that gen, because that's a good basis, and we can go on and talk all day how good those Pokemon I talked about are now, or bad, because some of these Pokemon don't really stack up now than they used to, but they were great back then, and there are the some that do hang in there. So the first Pokemon I want to start with, you guys probably this one people wanted to actually be one of the first gods, but this one I just feel like didn't really. I felt like Gengar beat it out, but Alakazam was, yes, a good Pokemon. It was faster than Gengar. It did have just as good as a move pool, but I felt like Gengar on like the typing was a bit better. You know, him being a ghost type, his moves were a bit better. He could work around everything, and then later on proved to be just a better Pokemon. So that's why I put him there. But Alakazam was still great. First, had an amazing special stat, and it was just faster in general. What else could you do? You know, it did have a great move pool. Common moveset: Psychic, Recover. Thunder Wave was common on him, which, you know, it would be great to make them slower. Paralysis, Seismic Toss. Reflect was also there because he had great special defense with the special, but he had like pitiful defenses. But with Reflect, that actually did something. It could give him some tankiness. The only thing that could stop Alakazam technically back then were Chanseys, Starmies, and other Alakazams. So we're talking a few Pokemon that really don't stop it all that much. It was really good. The only moves really that also, because I have Bug really, but those don't really, that didn't really have a good move pool back then. And here's another quick thing. I'll probably get to it after I go to the next one. So that's Alakazam. Everybody knows Psychic is just powerful stab, always gonna go first, and just that's all pretty much Alakazam was used for. We know, I guess to touch a little bit, we know it got really good, I guess, in Gen 4, but I think Gengar was better in Gen 4. Gen 5, same thing, Gengar was better in Gen 5, and then Gen 6, it did get a Mega Evolution. It does very well in, I think it's in the UU tier. I'm not exactly sure where Alakazam is now, but it's just been so overshined by Gengar. But Alakazam did just a lot of work back in Gen 1 to like beat out Gengar's, but then Gengar just proved himself to just be a little bit more. Now, moving to the second Pokemon, one of the really good physical offensive Pokemon. I wanted to give it to Dragonite, but I felt that I think Tauros deserves this a bit more better. Now you guys, this list gets a little crazy. Huh? I choose Tauros over Dragonite. I will say, yes, after Gen 1, Dragonite becomes a lot better, especially after Gen 4, 5, and 6, Dragonite. Way too much. But here's why I like Tauros. One of the best offensive types in just the whole like generation. No real weaknesses. Fighting moves weren't really seen all that much, and it resisted Ghost, or I mean, just the flat out just didn't get affected by Ghost. So that was really good. It had just that resistance right there. 2 very powerful stab moves. One physical being Body Slam, which got up to ridiculous, I think, 137 base. And it also had 100 base attack and speed, which was nothing to laugh at. That's ridiculous at that point. And also had a 20% chance to crit, and with also Earthquake being a very or Body Slam, not I'll get to Earthquake later. Body Slam being a 30% chance to paralyze. So that was also something big. Back then, if you got stats, that was a big deal in Gen 1. It's really hard to break out of that also. It ran Earthquake to deal with Gengars very easily. Could 2-hit KO Gengar with Earthquakes. No problem. And Hyper Beam, just incredible. 225 base stab. It could one-shot a lot of things. 2-shot Chanseys at that point. Chanseys, they were pretty scary back then also. Getting back to what I was about to say about Alakazam, the weird game mechanic that I never mentioned back when I did all the first Gods of First Generation, one thing I should have mentioned, and I apologize for this, but in the actual game system, determining the critical hits was based on the speed stat. So the faster Pokemon had the higher chance to crit. And given the fast Pokemon like any Jolteon, any Alakazam, Tauros, that would be better over those tanky Pokemon that are slower. That did, yes, they value defense more, but Alakazam could crit just as much, more than that. But Tauros was definitely more on the crits. It can actually go 20%. I think I read somewhere 21% it can crit. Really weird. But obviously, back then, that's a really high percent chance to crit for that game, and then crits did matter a lot. That's what could turn around a game. It turned around games more back then than it does today, even though that also is up for debate. So yeah, that's Tauros, and I really like. I wanted to give it to Dragonite. Dragonite, very powerful. Yes, I think it had more base attack, but when we're talking about stabs in the first generation, stab was really what would change a Pokemon because of the moves. Because Dragonite didn't really have the dragon moves he would get later on, and Tauros just could really effectively use that Hyper Beam, which is pretty much it at that point. Last Pokemon want to go into, kind of want to get a little tanky, but also like mixed special tanky. No one might expect this, but this Pokemon was in the OU tier, and it was Executor. Executor was great. It was just a good fit on 18. Probably had the best typing in terms of resisting things like Psychic moves and Earthquake, which was great. So it could stop Alakazam. It could stop a Tauros also. So the past two Pokemon I just talked about. It could stop pretty much anything else. It was a good sleep Pokemon with Sleep Powder, so it does that. Sleep Powder, which sleep back then, really good. Psychic Stab, which was also very good, which that turns out to be a really high power, I think like over 300 power stab, because it had a 125 base special, which also worked out for a special offense too. 85 defense, which was actually a bit slightly above average. I would say average, but also 95 HP, very good. So that's why I say we're going off tanky here. Back then, the mixed tanks before Gen 4, those were actually the Pokemon to run. Like I mentioned, Snorlax. This one's just a bit under Snorlax too. Very common sleeper. It can also potentially sweep. People use it as a lead where they can just throw it out, put that first Pokemon to sleep, and you're in a tough spot at that point. It did do very well, like I said, against tank Pokemon, because you just put sleep, then you could really get running with any kind of Psychic. It dealt with Golems and Rhydons very well. You could run Mega Drain on it as a really good grass. It was a really good grass type move for the time. It couldn't. I guess you could also substitute Solar Beam in there, but that was risky. But that was also something to do. They also ran Explosion, which, not being stabbed, still did a lot of damage to Chanseys back then also, which Chansey, again, could have been on this list, but I did like more of the utility on Executor more. You can see some of my personal bias comes in here. This is all opinion. This has always been all opinion. But I did love how Executor did have that very good sleep powder, because I felt like being put to sleep back then could change the whole game. Even though it's not 100% accuracy, it was actually like 70, 80. It was also a really good Pokemon against Snorlaxes. So one, I wouldn't say counter, but a good, just even matchup against Snorlax. I guess who would get a good sleep, maybe some crits would determine Snorlax. Snorlax was hard to stop. And it could also easily stop Tauros because it would resist anything Tauros would throw at it, and resist that Earthquake. Just would have to take that Hyper Beam. Pretty much could. And yes, the speed on Executor, not really that great. So I guess that's where I would end the honorable mentions of the first generation. Those being the 3 Pokemon that could have made the gods, but not really, because as we know right now, Executor after, I would say, Gen 4 really doesn't stack up. And what is Executor got going for him now? I guess he's okay in whatever tier he's in. Again, to my knowledge, I don't know that. But I did find it very interesting looking back at these Pokemon we don't see at all today, but back then they were great. These were all in the OU tier. If you want to go by tiers, they were all in that OU tier. But taking tiers aside, they were still used a lot no matter what. They did a really good niche for whatever team you're running. They obviously had high attack power. They were good for what they're in. Just to get overshadowed by the later Pokemon that would come out in the later generations, items, and then like Dragonite, the hidden ability really worked out for Dragonite. And just going back to Gengar, just overshadowing Alakazam, just Gengar just more flexible. And they just helped Gengar get more moves, and they just did not really care about Alakazam so much. Same with Executor. Over time, his stats actually showed to be like just a little meh. But back then, those were actually, for Executor, those were great stats. So that is, as I end this again, this is the honorable mentions of the first generation. Keep the conversation going down in the comments below. What a Pokemon you guys say deserve to be up there? A lot of people say Golem was a good Pokemon. Again, Dragonite. And Rhydon 2 is also a good Pokemon. So that was it. You guys just have yourselves a good one.